members of the NUS community, students, faculty, staff, and alumni, somebody who is prepared to do something different, to make a contribution. Somebody who is mentally curious, who has got the spirit of the explorer, initiative, resourcefulness, boldness, willing to break new ground in many varied aspects and dimensions of sports, arts, culture, community service, academic work. And what distinguishes them is a great passion that they bring to their work.
You Alive.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Mr. Vishwa Sadasivan, Chairman of the You Alive Organizing Committee.
Good morning. Not only to all of you in this auditorium, but also to tens of thousands of students, alumni who are currently watching as well as participating in this live via webcam. This is the first time we're trying this out. We are hoping that this will reach out to even more people outside of Singapore even at some point. You Alive is not just a forum. That's not our intention. You Alive is actually a platform for minds to talk, for hearts to connect, and for indomitable spirits to inspire. And we mean this. And we are hoping that over time, You Alive will evolve into a movement of sorts, where like-minded individuals will step forward to make a difference to the environment we live in. NUS, especially in the recent years, has increasingly gained recognition in Asia as well as the world for its distinction as a teaching and research university. We know what NUS does and does well. But as we aspire, as NUS, as an organization, as an institution aspires to join the ranks of the top brand name universities in the world, just doing what we do well is not good enough. People need to know, we need to know what we stand for as an organization. That's crucial. Now, there are 200,000 alumni, NUS. Very few universities in the world can boast of this figure. 35,000 strong student body, few thousand strong faculty. And amongst us, there are many brilliant individuals with great career achievements, great success stories. But what we don't realize, not enough, is that amongst us, there are superb, special, magnificent individuals who have quietly gone on to pursue causes almost all their adult lives, believing in those causes enough with a view to making a difference. And these are people who are from the NUS family, alumni, students, faculty. You Alive celebrates these individuals, these unsung heroes. We want to celebrate their passion. We want to celebrate the action. We would like their spirits to inspire a lot more latent spirits out there, young people perhaps who want to do but don't know where to start, to say just go out there and do it. There's nothing like individuals doing the magic for other individuals who want the magic. I am personally very excited by the magnificent people, spirits, that You Alive is going to unearth month on month in the years to come. It leaves me now to thank the university, NUS leadership for the unstinting support, for first of all believing in this idea, and for supporting us and putting the money where the mouth is. That's very important. And the many individuals, staff and others, as well as the vendors who have worked with us, right? In particular, my dear friends from the Office of Alumni Relations, without whose unstinting support and dedication we wouldn't be here today. Professor Tan Cho Chuan, President of NUS, and who also happens to be the Chairman of the NUS Alumni Advisory Board, is unable to join us. He conveys his apologies as he's away in Davos. It gives me great pleasure now, ladies and gentlemen, to invite on stage Deputy President of NUS and Provost, my good friend, Professor Tan Ning Chai, to say a few words. Ning Chai.
Hi, good morning. Dear friends and alumni, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really delighted to see you here this morning. I think the idea of inspiring students with life stories of our very own alumni was first conceived by our Alumni Advisory Board. Now, true to the spirit of NUS, it wasn't just think and talk, but to do and execute. So some like-minded and passionate souls who believe in the cause took it up and worked with the relevant officers, students, and also alumni. And voila, we have, today, You Alive to be launched. Now, there were humps and bumps along the way, but through this, a raw idea is polished, refined, and now to be implemented. Now, You Alive is really a series of dialogue sessions featuring NUS alumni who have exemplified passion and commitment to a cause. And in so doing, they have made a positive change and impact in the society. Not only do we seek to capture the achievements of all these individuals, more significantly, we hope to glean precious insights to their hearts, their minds, and also motivation to make this world a better place. We hope these stories and also the personal interactions will serve to inspire and enrich imaginations, stir and renew desires to engage in very meaningful ways for the greater good of society. Now, at today's inaugural You Alive Forum, we are really most honored to have with us Dr. Noeleen Heyzer, Under Secretary General of the United Nations, as well as Executive Secretary of the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. We are indeed very proud to count Dr. Heyzer as one of our alumni. Dr. Heyzer's illustrious career spans various UN-related agencies, and her achievements really are far too many for me to list. Right? So suffice to say, Dr. Heyzer is really an international icon and has been instrumental in uplifting the lives and status of women all around the world. So the video later on will share more details. Now, ladies and gentlemen, You Alive Forum is brought to you by the collective energies and efforts of our alumni, staff, and students. As the old adage goes, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The forum would not be the same without the support and participation of any one party. I would therefore like to thank the Alumni Advisory Board, especially Vizwa, for leading the committee, and all NUS staff and students who have put in so much effort and passion into this particular project. And like what Vizwa has said, we hope you'll catch the magic. And I wish You Alive many more successes in time to come. Thank you and enjoy.
She came from humble beginnings and went on to receive a Nobel Peace Prize nomination. Today, she's Executive Director of the UN's Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. She is NUS graduate Nolene Hazer, and she's passionate about changing the world. We scratch beneath the surface to reveal the passion that drives her, the pursuit of equality and protection for women.
Women want a world in which inequality based on gender, class, caste, and ethnicity is absent from every country. Women want a world where poverty and all forms of violence are eliminated. A world where women have the opportunity to develop their full potential and where progress for women is progress for all.
Ladies and gentlemen, Nolene Hazer.
Professor Tan, Professor Lim, Chairperson Wiswa, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, what a joy it is for me to be here this morning at this university and to be asked to kick off this wonderful series, You Alive. I've been invited to talk to you for 10 minutes about the why and the what of my work. The what of my work. As many of you know, I work in the United Nations, and I have been working in the United Nations for over 3 decades. And I work in the United Nations because I believe. I believe in the principles of the United Nations. The Charter of the United Nations starts with the words, "We the peoples." And it commits its member states to ensure that there is development, there's peace and security for all its citizens and for all peoples of the world, so that they can live in larger freedom, freedom from want and freedom from fear. Now, this vision of the type of world that we want came because of the Second World War, and because many of our forebears said to themselves, never again, that we need to build an international community, an international system based on core sets of values and principles where we can have greater security, not just for one generation, not just for the present, but for all future generations, based on shared values. And if we are to really survive and to thrive, we have to ensure that our economy, our society, our politics, our systems of governance are in fact based on shared principles of justice, of equality, because we need these core values to bridge a divided world, an unequal world where discrimination still exists. And unless we address these discrimination, it could feed into the type of violence that we see in our world today. Now that's what drives me. But I've been working in 2 positions in the United Nations. First, as the executive director of Unifem, where it was a privilege and a joy for me to place on the global agenda an agenda of gender equality and women's empowerment. And here I worked very hard to ensure that there was economic security and rights for some of the poorest people in the world, poorest women in agriculture and the informal sector. But at the same time, when I was working on the issues of development, I was exposed to conflict-affected countries. And because of that, I made sure that Security Council took on the issue of women, peace, and security as part of their security agenda, so that it would not just be seen in terms of a weapon-based security to keep our world safe, but it has to be a security from the perspective of people. And here, many of you, I think, would know the Security Council Resolution 1325, which talks about the impact of war on communities and women's lives, but beyond that, to look at women beyond just victims, but as shapers of a new future, shapers and someone who can actually make sure that they are on the peace table and that there is justice in the reconstruction of a new society so that it's not back to the old. Now, in my current role, I'm now the Undersecretary General of the United Nations for Asia Pacific. And in this role, I've been asked to set a regional agenda that takes into account the challenges of the Asia Pacific region. And I actually see 4 challenges that we need to address in order to shape this new agenda. And it is an agenda for shared prosperity and, in fact, and a sustainable future. It is one that has to deal with economic equality and equity, especially as part of the economic recovery process. How do we ensure that we create wealth for the poor so that they can participate more in the market? We need to understand that in Asia Pacific, the continent is a continent of disparities, and therefore we need to make sure that there's shared prosperity and that we are able to build in the what I call an agenda of social equity, together with the fact that we need to come to terms with the fact that we have an earth with a limited carrying capacity, and therefore ecological sustainability is important. So how do you do economic and social development within the whole framework of ecological sustainability? Because, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot take the gifts of the earth for granted. It is of limited schemes, if you like, and therefore we really need to value the gifts of the earth, not just for ourselves, but also for future generations. And finally, all of you know, just by reading the newspapers, that Asia Pacific is exposed to natural disasters. And therefore, how do we not lose the gains of development that we've put so much of our energy into? And how do we ensure that we build the resilience of our communities to, in fact, deal with future disasters? So that's what I do. Now, why do I do what I do? I do what I do because I believe. I believe that we are the writers of our own history and the shapers of our own destiny. And I learned this because I grew up in Singapore at a time when Singapore was still a colony. And there was a struggle against colonialism to build new nation states, one that could deliver services and a life for its people. But I also learned this when I was in the University of Singapore. And I cherish my years in the University of Singapore. I had some of the best teachers, and my foundations was actually built here. It was a time and a place. A time when I could build up my intellectual, emotional resources, but also to build up my practical skills. But ladies and gentlemen, it was also a place where I could dream, where I could imagine, and a place where I could engage with the world that was evolving and unfolding around me. And also, it was a place where we were encouraged not just to learn other people's knowledge, but to create our own understanding and our own knowledge, and to legitimize our own lives, if you like, so that it was not an alienated type of learning. But in Singapore, at that time, in the campus, we also engaged as a student body with the politics and the urgencies of our times. And here I joined the Democratic Socialist Club. And I was very quickly made the international secretary of the club. And that actually became a bit of a turning point, because I was sent to the Scandinavian countries to learn the third way, if you like. And it was a whole discussion of what type of society do we need, what type of institutions, what's the role of the labor union that used to be the engine of the colonial struggle, but now had to be integrated into the new nation state. And during this journey, I met with Gunnar Myrdal, who at that time had just completed the Asian drama. And he was also the economic Nobel Prize winner. He had completed this book called The Asian Drama. It was a three-volume. At the time when he was the first executive secretary of the Economic Commission of Europe, and he was working with the first executive secretary of ESCAP at that time. Little did I know that 3.5 decades later, I would become the first woman executive secretary of ESCAP. And a lot of it was due to the discussions that we had. He talked about the Asian drama, and at that time, it was a drama of underdevelopment. The fact that many of our countries, because of the colonial history, it was difficult, it was extremely difficult to get out of poverty. But he would not have imagined that in less than 3 decades from the time he spoke to me, that Asia would be the driving force of the economic recovery in this current global crisis, and that we were the center of gravity of the new economic shifts, because at that time, it was so bleak. What was very clear to me, again, from that conversation and that time, was that we can change our own history. The drama, the human drama, need not be a tragedy, need not lead to poverty, that we, as human beings, have the power and the potential to shape and reshape our future. And that was a message to me. So finally, ladies and gentlemen, if there's one message that I would like to leave with you, it's about another belief of mine. And this is the fact that I believe in leadership with vision. I believe that many of you will be leaders of tomorrow, and that as leaders of tomorrow, you need to feel in your guts the instinct of the type of changes and interventions that you can make in order to make your world a better place. And that you need to be able to articulate what this vision is. You need to be able to inspire people so that they know that this path is possible. And you need to allow people the agency to help shape their own future. But more than anything, the leaders of the future will have to have one more addition for the 21st century. And this is, you need to have the capacity to bridge some of the divides in our world today, because that is what we need. I would like to end actually with a quote from a historian that I like very much, and this is Howard Zinn. And he said, human history is not only a history of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness, where people have behaved magnificently. This gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending the spinning top of a world in a different direction. May we be together to ensure that we have a prosperous future and a sustainable Asia-Pacific. I thank you, and I thank all of you for listening.
Hi, Nolan.
Hello, Wiswa. How are you?
You know, it's very easy to say what you did and not mean it.
He told me that he's going to give me a hard time, so be prepared.
I'm here for the next 10 minutes to really get to know, for all of us to get to know you better, right? Now, you grew up in Katong, in Singapore. East Coast, beautiful place. I live there. How many of you are from East Coast? See, beautiful place. How come so many of you are not yet enlightened? You grew up, you went to school, Marymount Primary, and then secondary, the famous, or shall I say notorious, Katong Convent, right? And you shared with me that your early days, actually in Singapore, your early days, you saw the plight of migrant workers. You saw how women were treated firsthand. And to a large extent, you said that that sort of shaped your desire, the urge the need to go out there and make a difference. That's very early. You were still in school when you started feeling it. Of course, this became encrusted when you came to university. Now, what was it that you witnessed? Can you give us some specific examples? What is it that you saw, that you witnessed, that sort of ignited the fire?
Well, I grew up in Katong, but not only in Katong. I also spent actually the formative years of my life in the old part of Singapore, in Chinatown actually, along Teochew Street. And I witnessed, even before I went to school, what type of a community it was. It was one that was really very vibrant. It was poor. It was extremely poor. It was a place for migrant workers.
And you came from a poor family yourself.
Yes,
right?
yes, yeah. And also the fact that I saw people working and still not being able to break out of the bonds of poverty. And I saw people carrying rice sacks across those junks, along Singapore River, and I couldn't believe that they would count every single cent. So that, for me, was I questioned from the very start, why is it people could work their whole life through and could not actually design a life that could sustain them and even could sustain a family. So that, I think that sense of injustice, that
what
something
about,
is
what
not
about
quite,
as far as women are concerned?
Well,
what
I saw, I think the one image that I had going to school along this very difficult stretch, there used to be vegetables along the streets, and there were old women, obviously with no one to support them, picking out from the garbage and taking out some of the vegetables and cutting all the rotten parts away and just keeping the good part. And I was moved because, even despite all that, there's shine in their eyes. There is like something in them that was very, very powerful. But they moved me so much that I realized even if I had 5 cents at that time, I would give it to them. And I think that was what was
but
somehow. Yes, I did. Yes,
now,
I did.
The fact is, 40 years on, we still find that. Perhaps not in Singapore, but where you go to in Asia Pacific, you still find that. You still see that, right?
Yes.
How do you feel 40 years on from the first time you witnessed this?
Well, I think I'm a person of hope, and I'm actually a very optimistic person. And what I've seen is that, as I said, the Asian drama of Guna Midal predicted a terrible future for Asia Pacific, and we changed our own future. And I think that's what has really also been a lesson from Singapore, from the colony to what it is today, from the lives of many of the people around me, but also the fact that I've seen many people, against all odds, really striving to rebuild a future and to strengthen the human spirit. And the human spirit is just unbelievable. I've been now, not just in terms of situations of extreme poverty and helping people there, but also I've been in some of the worst war zones that you can possibly imagine in my work as Executive Director of Unifem. I mean, really, some of the worst. And to see how some of the camps where young girls have been kidnapped from very young and so on. And
this is more recent?
This was in actually the recent history of Liberia is a very good one, in Rwanda, in Burundi, and really helping.
You were there in Rwanda?
Yes. In fact, in most of these countries, in Afghanistan as well. And the fact that people strive to build a good future, and they're not alone. And I think the whole thing, the message that I'm giving and the message of my own life has also been that in all this we are never alone. And what we need to ensure is that we have leaders of tomorrow and leaders of today that really care about solidarity, that really know that our lives today are so intertwined, especially in the age of globalization.
Well, you must be an optimist to have said that we have leaders like that. The truth is, I think they are very much a minority. I'm being very honest, maybe a little provocative, but I guess if I could be blunt, to continue to work for the United Nations for 3 decades and more, and remain optimistic, you really must be a diehard optimist. Because for a lot of people, the UN is, if I could use the term, somewhat impotent. You know, forgive me for being blunt. You pass resolutions when you have nothing else to do. That's the perception that people have. And what then? The Security Council passes resolutions like 1325, and then what happens? You still, 40 years on, still see the same things happening again. With due respect to the United Nations, the intent is great, the heart's in the right place, but does it translate to action? That's what, in the years you have served in the UN, have you actually seen any concrete action come out of the resolutions or of the speeches of the work you have actually embarked on?
Wisma, when I arrived in New York to take over the Women's Fund, it was in the midst of a major reform of the UN. And I remembered that at that time, the foreign minister of Australia in a GA debate actually described the United Nations a little bit like what you are saying. And he said the best way to describe the United Nations are in these words. An organization whose principles have been made in heaven with a bureaucracy made in hell. Okay. Now that's enough to put a young, enthusiastic woman off, right? And worse still, when I came to Unifem, what did I find? I found a broken down fund, right? So, and what do you do? But I know that whilst we work for improvement, we need not to wait until we have perfect institutions to make change happen. And we need to make change happen simultaneously. So what I did was I literally went in, and because we had the right mandate, you just do the work and you make the change happen. So immediately we put on the global agenda the work on ending violence against women's lives. And when I went to the conflict-affected zones, I discovered that the reality on the ground had not been addressed. There was no proper framework, and therefore we need to really make these principles live. That's why I say that I work from the principles of the United Nations. And I tried, someone teased me and said, oh, you're not quite behaving like a United Nations bureaucrat. And I said, no, because I'm the United Nations of the future. So.
What was that, because you were not a man?
No, because I just didn't care about the politics of the bureaucracy. I just went in there and said, what are the changes? This thing that I talk about, having the instinct, the guts, about the type of change that people need on the ground, and where the United Nations can make a difference. So I went in there, they've helped to bring their voices up, put the issues on the agendas, and got the United Nations Security Council, no less, to come up with this resolution. And the power of the Security Council, whatever it is that it is actually legalized. In other words, it is something
it's
that
illegal.
It is exactly. Yeah. So you need to actually do something. And what happened? After all the hard work of putting that is another story. You need to bring me back for another section of what I had to do.
Got money?
No, okay. but really, I mean, getting that whole resolution through. But once the framework was there, it's very easy to then say the work is over. But the work has just started. So I went to every conflict-affected country that I could find to make sure that it got implemented and that there was a constituency to make this happen. In fact, I recruited Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf as my consultant at that time. And I made her go and sit down in 14 countries with the women from the conflict-affected zones. And by the time she was through, she became the first woman president of Africa. So that, 1325. When it was the women of Rwanda, we made sure that we used this resolution to get them into parliament. And eventually, when people ask who have the largest percentage, which country has the largest percentage of women in parliament, it's not the Scandinavian countries, it was Rwanda at 50%. And what did they do? They changed the laws. They changed the laws so that women could inherit the land, because most of the men were killed in the wars. Yeah. And so they could inherit the land, and they were able to revive the agricultural sector. And therefore, we had food security in the country, and the country today is one of the better off African countries. Burundi, we managed to get, through Nelson Mandela, women onto the peace tables to again reshape the whole strategy. And today, in all the peace operations in the whole United Nations, if you dare not take in the operational framework of 1325, you're in for trouble because there's a constituency that keeps you accountable. So at the end of the day, it is about accountability, it is about implementation. So there's still lots of problems because we're not living in a perfect world, but honestly, at the same time, with all our imperfections and warts, we can make change happen.
You see, ladies and gentlemen, that's Nolin Hazer. The real Nolin Hazer, right? You see, what I've learned over the years is you need to know where to poke, right? So and the real, look, this is the passion. This is who she is, you know, and I'd like you all, I'm sure you have many, many burning questions, issues. I would urge you to stand up. Please don't read from your notes. Stand up and ask from your heart what you believe in. And I'm very, very confident that Nolin will be honest in her responses. Pro-UN, albeit, but honest. Okay? All right. So could we have the first question or comment? Yes, please. Please identify yourself so that Nolin knows.
My name is Francis Pavri, alumnus of NUS as well. This continues from what Wisma was saying. Because I came here, I hoped to you had to say something about the MDG, the Millennium Development Goals. And this is one of the visions made in heaven, year 2000, wonderful idea. We have these objectives, gender equality, reducing poverty, et cetera, et cetera. We're now 10 years into the program, 2015. And from what you hear, chances are very few of those goals will be met. So what, I mean, wonderful ideas, reduce poverty, get people out, gender equality being one of them. What's happened 10 years into the program? Chances are 2015, forget it, we're not going to meet any of those targets. One or two countries, Bhutan being one, which will probably, but most countries will not be able to. What happened with this wonderful idea to reduce poverty, but doesn't work, as you mentioned about the UN? Things don't work. Can you elaborate a little bit on that one?
Absolutely. Well, for those who are not clear what these goals are the Millennium Development Goals. There are 8 such goals, and it was put together by all the heads of states that came to a summit in 2000. And it literally cuts across from education to hunger to poverty to environment, the issues of water and sanitation and so on. And the thing is that the good news, let me tell you the good news. The good news is that we actually have met the poverty goals. And because the poverty goal happened to be halving the world's absolute poverty by 2015. And because of India, because of China, we have, at the aggregate global level, been able to meet these goals. But for me, the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, are not sufficient. Because even if you manage to get half the world's absolute poor out of poverty, what happens to the other half? I think we have to go beyond these goals. And some of the goals are not met because there are disparities in Asia-Pacific region. There are some people, some countries, some communities that have excelled. We don't even need these goals anymore because some of the goals are so basic. They're really, really basic. Making sure that you have equal number of girls and boys in primary school or whatever. I mean, Singapore, we don't need these goals. We've gone beyond that. Maybe what you need is a little bit of the environmental sustainability because we are still emitting a lot of CO2. And other greenhouse gas because of our development strategies. But at the same time, there are many communities where the goals are not being met, but worse still, because of what we have faced in recent years, what I call the triple threats. The threats of food, rising food prices, energy prices, the financial crisis. We are not a static population. There are people that are going in and out of poverty. We are losing our development gains because of natural disasters and so on. And therefore, it's not static. But at the same time, the goals have helped to focus the work of development assistance. but it was an attempt to make sure that if you say that these are the goals and you have come up with results and timelines, then you need to put the resources of development into meeting these goals. I think one of the problems is actually Goal 8, which is the one on development partnership and the commitment of the developed countries that if the developing countries make sure that they have the governance system right, that they put in the right amount of money. But because of the financial crisis, because of many other commitments, the resources, in fact, have been dwindling. And I think that this is the time to put back. And the story is not over yet. We still have 5 years. And therefore, I am very sure that there would be acceleration in terms of the achieving of the hard-to-achieve goals. And the hard-to-achieve goals are actually very sad that I have to mention this, but they are gender equality goals. A lot of them, unfortunately, are health-related goals, related to maternal mortality. And this is not all right from where I sit, that in the world today, when we have the best technologies, that we still have 250,000 women dying every year because of childbirth. And this is something that can be addressed and addressed very efficiently. So the issue of maternal mortality is a major one. The issue of maternal health is a major one. And this is something that I intend to drive myself in the Asia-Pacific region. And we've got countries that are now committed to make sure that in the next 5 years, we can at least close some of these remaining gaps. But also, what I have also done, especially in the context of ESCAP, is to show that closing development gaps is not a cost, but it's an investment. And we need to change our mindset. And it is an investment that is linked to economic recovery. Because unless we have economic security, unless we have resilient communities, we are not going to create this so-called united, larger market for Asia-Pacific, where we can actually pick up and increase the aggregate demand because there's a fall in aggregate demand in the Western economies. Right. So I'm very optimistic.
Thank you. Yes.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Amelia, and I'm currently an undergraduate at NUS. And coincidentally, I've been working with organizations on the Millennium Development Goals since 2003, and I do not think that the world will end in 2012. I don't think that the world will end at 2015. I think the goals have been a guideline and has been very helpful that a lot of states have ratified it and tried to work on it since then. And I deplore like pessimism on that aspect of how the Millennium Development Goals haven't really been achieved thus far. So thank you for your elaboration on that. To the audience and to Mr. Vishwa, I think that we should not, do not take offense at what I'm saying, but like I don't think we should applaud her. Of course, Dr. Hazer has been doing an amazing job, but I don't think that we should be applauding her for it, but we should be normalizing this kind of behavior because it's not about like, wow, she's doing such a great job. And of course, I'm sorry, I don't mean to like put down anything you're doing, yeah. But like, it's normalizing this kind of behavior and saying that this is what everyone should be working toward. Like, it may not be about saving the world or saving the 2.5 billion people who don't have access to clean sanitation, but it's about just living your own, your cause, your life. You can just be looking after your family. Like, that's very important and it's a basic thing that we can all do. So let's try to normalize that kind of behavior and not just applaud it. Okay, sorry. And then my question is...
Oh, you have a question.
Thank you. Thank you for shining and shine on. My question is about how in the last year, when we had on 12 August 2010, we had the International Year of Youth. And I'm asking on your opinion of how we can engage the youth even more, and as well as how we can bring up the new generation of leaders, be it in Singapore or in Asia Pacific or in the world. Yeah, what are your views on how we can engage, basically, engage and bring up the youth, the younger generation.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And I think it's absolutely right because all of us have core sets of values. And I think at the end of the day, it's really to ignite that. And I think this is the whole purpose of the series, is to show that actually all of us have got our passions and our truths. And at the end of the day, it's really to make this come alive. And really, all of us want to live in the world to contribute to as much good as possible, and therefore we do it in our own ways. I chose to do it in this way, but others have chosen to deal with it, maybe in the private sector, to make it more accountable, others to create beautiful gardens, and all of that contribute to what I call the human experience.
Basically, the point is, don't just sit on your hand and think about it. Just get up and do something, even in your own space, in your own way. So it's a great point, you know, about normalizing it. In fact, that's exactly what we're hoping to do. Hopefully, in a year's time, the idea would be a little bit more normal.
Yeah, and I think the idea is also that because Singapore is so small. Huh? I mean, I know we are very big in our own estate. But we are small, and then look at the globe, right? We're a little dot there. And yet, you know, we have been able to produce people. I mean, I think the whole thing is that we have been able to produce players in the global scene, or people who are able to cross borders. And this is something that, you know, allows us to be part of the human community. I think in terms of youth, absolutely. I think the youth will be the leaders of tomorrow. And what you engage with, what inspire you, where you get your inspiration from, the type of connectivity you have. Because increasingly, you live in an entirely different world. The world that all of you have happened to be living in today was not the world that I grew up in. In fact, when I was growing up, it was very difficult to connect. It was a real privilege to even travel. Right? But here, you're on Facebook, you are on Twitter, you are connecting with everyone, anyone, you can get all kinds of knowledge, and therefore you are very much a knowledge-based community, and you can connect up, but you will also experience the fact that your lives are more intertwined than anybody else's lives because you are part of the global community. But at the same time, you also have to realize that it's not everyone that is connecting in this particular way because there are disparities. And I have to just keep on mentioning that there are disparities in the world. And therefore, and these disparities, unless they are addressed through the core values, I call it the values of the United Nations, but really the core values of justice, of fairness, and so on, that you are going to also generate a sense of discrimination and grievances, which, unless addressed, would actually undermine a lot of the development gains. And therefore, how, at the end of the day, do we create the sense of shared responsibility for shared prosperity as well as sustainability? Because we also have just one earth for our home, and you will be inheriting the earth, the type of earth and the type of environment that we leave behind. And therefore, the issue, I again believe, the issue of equity, the issue of sustainability, the issue of shared prosperity will be the issues of your time.
You know, just a quick point. We keep saying the youth of today are the leaders of tomorrow. I think that has changed somewhat. The youth of today, many of them are leaders of today. You know, the old adage, I think, needs to be revised with all these new opportunities available. Thank you. We'll have to move on. May I suggest this? Why don't we keep the questions and the comments shorter? Because I see quite a few hands. I'd like to give as many people the opportunity to ask the questions.
Could we maybe get a few questions
at a time?
And then let me...
Yes. Question over there, and then Harry after that. Yeah, let's start with that.
Just very quick questions. Unless I'm wrong, the UN chart has not been revised for the last 60 years. And I think according to the Article 4, it's a condition for the states to join the United Nations. And I think at least around 140 states have not decided of the chart yet, including the definition of the permanent members of the Security Council that was representing the states that was economically, military, and politically the strongest in the end of the World War II. So because every organization is changing, do you think that the UN will change the permanent members of the Security Council? If yes, which African country, which Arab country, so that the UN keeps a more central place in the international political life today and not represent more specific interest of some countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Next couple of questions. Yes. Why don't we just go to the mic? Keep the questions coming. We'll take these 3 questions. Harry, you could join the queue too. Let's get it going.
Okay, yeah. Donald Wyatt, NUSS. This is a comment or question closer to home. I used to be the manager of the Asia Secretariat of FIATA, which is a roster participant of United Nations, ESCAP. And I used to attend your meetings there twice a year up in Bangkok. Now, the question here is nothing to do with ladies and women's rights, but it's about transportation. And FIATA, of course, is the International Federation of Freight Forwarders. Our head office is in Zurich. So the big project that was now being promoted in ESCAP, which was funded by Japan, began somewhere in the 1990s. So I think it's taken 20 years. And the idea of this project was the Asian Highway. The Asian Highway is the one that starts from Singapore and goes all the way up to China, Yunnan. There's been many, many problems. It's 20 years down the road. And what was very interesting just now is that Minister of Foreign Affairs, George Yeo, made the trip from Laos right to Yunnan. So what development, if you're familiar with this project, what developments have progressed, how much progress has been made in these 20 years, such that tomorrow I can get on a bus and get to Yunnan. Okay,
all right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, can we keep the questions shorter, please? I see a lot of hands. Yes.
Dr. Nalin, it's an honor to have you here. I'd like to say that recently, after the global economic crisis, the huge bailout that the major countries did to the big firms could, in a way, cater to the need of MDG or alleviate the poverty and crisis all over the world. So, global economic crisis, in a way, brought forth the deficiencies of public and private institutions. How does United Nations sees or rethinks leadership in that perspective?
Okay, I think three very good questions first. Yeah. All right, in terms of the reform of the Security Council, there's been a lot of discussion, and it's not just the reform of the Security Council. I think it's the whole reform of the global governance that has to be taken into account. In fact, the Monetary Fund, the International Monetary Fund, is also re-looking itself in terms of economic governance. So it's really the fact that because power is shifting, and there are new emerging economies, there are new power holders, and the stakes have shifted, if you like, that the voice and the representation issue is critical. And the idea of having more inclusiveness in terms of making sure that global decision-making, because a lot of the work that affect our lives, even at national and regional level, comes from global decision-making. And therefore, how do we ensure that in global decision-making and policy-making, that we have the right people at the right table? And this is something that is still going on. So I cannot, of course, predict which countries, but I think you know which countries will be asking for the seat. Anyway, but let me come back to the question on the Asian Highway. In fact, that is a really critical issue. And let me link it up to the third question about what type of a role are we playing after the economic crisis. The whole idea about the economic crisis is the fact that we cannot go back to business as usual. Whatever it is, the export-led manufacturing systems that we're all used to, that have generated the growth for Asia as a manufacturing base for the world, and the debt fuel consumption, especially of the United States, is not going to work. And whatever it is, there will be a shortfall in aggregate demand and in consumer spending. And we need to now look at new drivers of growth. And one of the rethinking is the fact that Asia is more integrated with the rest of the world than with itself. We are more comfortable with the rest of the world than with our neighbors. And therefore, the challenge today is how do we look for new drivers of growth that invest in domestic consumption for the larger economies, the economic powerhouses like China, India, but also how do we develop unified regional markets for the other countries in the world to benefit from the high economic growth of other countries, but to be a more integrated regional market. And for that, you need regional connectivity. And of course, this means better roads. So the Asian Highway has come back. In fact, I was just in Chiang Rai before coming here, and I met Foreign Minister George Sheo. I was supposed to be on that trip, but I decided to come here because of this event. So I gave up my road trip to be here.
She's got her priorities right.
Yeah. And but because of the ecological threats, just having the roads is not sufficient. So we have developed what is called an intermodal transport system. So we're looking at the interlink between roads and rails. So actually in July of 2010, we actually brought into reality the Trans-Asian Railway treaties, and there are many countries that have now signed up to the Trans-Asian Railway Treaty. And the intermodal system is what we're going for. But at the same time, this year, we are developing what are called the dry ports. What does it mean? When you have the network of rails and roads, we have to ensure, this is what I talked about, shared prosperity. We have to ensure that the prosperity in Asia is not just in the network of coastal areas where we have the ports for the exports, but that we can actually create the dry ports with the landlocked countries, the least developed countries, and how can you generate actually local vibrant economies for the communities, or else we are constantly going to have this whole thing of human trafficking together with international movement of population and migration. So how do we actually root people and generate jobs for them? And therefore the whole idea of not just the Asian highways, but also feeder roads, so that farmers can bring their goods to markets. Not just the coastal prosperous area, but linking up the landlocked countries, the hinterlands with the coastal areas, and how do we develop dry ports? So that's where we are. And
a quick question. So you have these plans on the drawing board. How challenging is it, or how do you go about persuading governments to actually adopt this plan?
Yeah.
Because if they don't, and many of them have very narrow vistas and short horizons.
So the thing is, the whole thing is about political will and commitment, right? And money. And we have to follow where the money goes. So I was actually invited by the chair of ASEAN at that time when Thailand was a chair, Prime Minister Kasit, Apisit, and Foreign Minister Kasit Param invited me to address the ASEAN +6 head of state to give the concept of what we mean by regional connectivity. And regional connectivity, ladies and gentlemen, it's not just the hardware of connectivity, it's not just the roads and the rails, it's also about the logistics and about the trucks and the customs and the people and the visas and so on. So it's also about the software of connectivity. And therefore, we did a whole presentation. But what is good is the coming together of this idea as a new driver of growth in order to create this united market, together with the fact that in order to recover from the economic crisis, countries were putting in tremendous amount in the stimulus packages. So the stimulus packages, actually, we were able to direct the investment, like China alone, put in 580 billion into the whole stimulus package. And this was, they were able to then finance many of what we call the missing links, the roads that were still had to be built, the upgrading of rails and roads, the creation of speed trains to make it viable. So Asia is investing in itself, I think, for the first time, and directing the stimulus packages, not just from China, but also from India, and each one in their national budgets, like even Vietnam, is putting money into this. So it is an ASEAN commitment, and it's gone beyond that. In fact, when I was visiting Bangladesh, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh wanted that. and said, oh, we have to link Bangladesh as the least developed countries to what is happening in the ASEAN region. And when I went to Pakistan, the Prime Minister and the President of Pakistan said, you have to try to link us, not maybe through India, but via Central Asia, maybe to Kazakhstan, so that we were able to access the energy resources because we're having an energy crisis. So there are all these discussions going on. What is so exciting in my work is that I get to meet the leaders who have to take decisions, and I try very hard to use my role as the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations to try to shape those decisions and to mobilize the right alliances so that these decisions would benefit some of the poorest people in the poorest communities.
I think probably I'm sure you agree, her weapon is her non-threatening approach. No, you have a very non-threatening approach and that sparkle in your eyes. Sometimes that helps because, when you take a confrontational approach, the other guy backs off, especially when you're dealing with leaders who have inflated egos quite often and who have got very narrow positions. Could you just share with us one anecdote, an example, without mentioning names if you choose not to, of how challenging it was and how you sort of managed to persuade them, especially being a woman in a male-dominated world?
Well, I think if I have a non-threatening style, because I don't think we need to threaten anyone, but also I want accessibility.
Now she's overdoing it. No?
Yeah. But the thing is, I honestly believe that to get the best knowledge is local knowledge. So you need people. You want to be accessible to people. So people should be able to come to you and really tell you what's in their hearts and what's really inside them that they otherwise would not tell you because you are in some high position or whatever. And you don't get to the truth, and you will be making the wrong decision. So accessibility is critical. And what you do with that knowledge is something else. So a very good example of how difficult it was for me. Okay, this is Afghanistan. And this was at the time when they were looking at the bond process was on. They were doing the peace process. And I was trying to get women onto the peace table. And I wanted to make sure that women had a stake in the country. That
you were Unifem then?
I was the head of Unifem.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make sure that women would be recognized as equal citizens in the new constitution, and that the girls could go to school without being killed, and so on. So I would even mention him by name because now he's been so transformed.
Wow, thanks to you.
Not only to me, I think to the women of Afghanistan. But this is the SRSG, Ambassador Brahimi. He was, at that time, the Secretary General's envoy for Afghanistan. So when I put these issues to him, he turned around to me and he was really angry. He said, Nolene, just get this thing straight. I am dealing with the warlords. I am dealing with all these characters, and you want me to bring women? Are you crazy? and then he also said, your agenda, as defined by you, is not the agenda of the local women, not the agenda of the women in the countryside, not the agenda of the women who have lived in Afghanistan. It's the diaspora. It's the diaspora. Have you been to Afghanistan? So of course I put my head down and said, no, Ambassador Brahimi, I have not been. Well, you go to Afghanistan, then you start talking to me. So I did. So I did. And I didn't get in touch with him after that because he was so angry with me. But then I mobilized 1,000 women in Afghanistan from 7 provinces. And I invited him and President Karzai and all the people.
And they were physically present.
They were on the stage, and all these women were there in the burnt-out cinema on International Women's Day. And I worked, of course, with Seema Sama, who was at that time the women minister. And I said, we have to get this agenda right. And it was such an amazing experience. It was so amazing that he actually was converted. And he said, all right, Nali, fine. You got your message through, because these were all the village women and they wanted a new future. They said, and I, of course, went out to the villages and all that, and I said, let me tell you that every time when I asked these women, they kept saying, it's not for myself, it's for my daughters, so that I don't have to sell my daughters to repay debt. I don't have to send my daughters into early marriage, give my daughters a future. So I just said to him, it is about our daughters. And so towards the end, he actually was the one that led the whole show. And we were able to then come in with the Loyal Jilga. This was the Grand Assembly that did the consultation for the Constitution and so on. And we managed, actually, with the help not just of the women, but also of the men, the more enlightened men in the country, to get a whole article in terms of equal rights for women in the Afghanistan Constitution, and also getting women, girls into school. But I just want to say that at the end of his term, when Ambassador Brahimi made his closing speech, he addressed his speech to the women, and all of them cried because he became their biggest champion.
Wow, superb, great story, great story. Great story. Now, you want to answer the gentleman's question? Do you remember?
No.
You remember his question?
No, I've answered.
You have answered it? She's answered it? You satisfied?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go to Harry, your question, and then Bernard, and then I've got one or two questions that we got from students, which we got via webcam, right? Okay, Harry, quick question, and Bernard. Yeah.
Well, I've been around quite a bit to the various disaster areas in North South Asia, mostly because of my
Harry was an ambassador.
Yes.
Church connections and my diplomatic service. They make me move around these countries after I've taken retirement. So to be involved in the aid programs as well as other community building programs. So many times in Cambodia, Aceh, Bencoolen, when there was an earthquake, Nepal. And you mentioned Chiang Rai recently. I was there, but a few years ago. And the missionary pastor from Penang brought me around, showed me some development. He says, here is some agricultural development, which is fine, but here's a nice, very nice golf course. And what has happened is the farmer boys been taken in as caddies, and they get employment, so forth and so forth. But in a little while, all that money disappeared because they go and waste their money in karaoke joints and things like that. And you talk about ecological sustainability, but this is another form of sustainability. They get money, they don't know how to spend the money. They don't use the money to bring in further income. And in the process, they lost their land. One of the reasons why I got into the mood of saying I must slowly move away from this passion for playing golf. I used to play golf a lot, but actually I gave up after that. And
Harry,
here's a question of sustainability on a social sense and making all kinds of development such that the kampung spirit, even primitive societies have the kampung spirit. Here, Singapore has lost its kampung spirit in a way. This community spirit. There's a social angle to development. The point about United Nations and governments and the road to Yunnan, I've been with the Lisu tribe and all those people. This is very good because we need the governments and United Nations to develop the public sector areas. When it comes to private sector, the whole development has been emphasized on consumerism. And that is the wrong model.
So what's
and
your
China
question?
is getting into that kind of model.
Harry,
My question is, development on the sustainability side must have a social angle and not just a consumer angle. Development from the point of view of from the agenda of the person having the capital, knowing what this is like in their own country, and trying to replicate what is in their own country to a new underdeveloped or non-developed country.
Okay, got it. And I guess that's the reason why Professor Yunus decided that he'll focus on women, not men, in the Grameen Bank concept. Because it's so clear. Quick question from Bernard, please.
Dr. Noelene, my name is Bernard. I'll start with 3 words of thanks. Thanks for doing the great work that you're doing for women and doing them proud. Thanks for doing NUS proud and Singapore proud. My question is, how does the UN, it's a challenge, ensure that that individuals, societies give towards the various disasters reach its people? I mean, that remains a challenge, but from the kampong spirit, where we are not able to go there, we give aid, but we read reports that this goes awry, it doesn't reach the very sources that need the aid. It's a scourge.
Yeah.
What can the UN do about it? And perhaps you'd like to share with us your experiences, thoughts on that.
Thank you.
Well, I think the 2 questions are quite similar.
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Ambassador Hari, for your question. And I think the point that you're making is very critical. Because at the end of the day, if it's not just governments that shape our society, it's not just our communities, increasingly it's also the private sector. And the role of the private sector has to be brought more into the framework of accountability. I mean, one of the reasons why, unfortunately, we have this financial crisis that have turned into a terrible economic crisis was, in fact, the lack of ethical systems in the way we do our economic engagements, and the lack of accountability, so that one or a few individuals can actually overturn the whole system. And therefore, I think the whole issue of ethics, I mean, some people call it corporate social responsibility, but that's not enough, because usually it is voluntary. I think somehow we need to build into the way of doing business and the way of producing our goods and services an ethical value that takes into account the issues of equity as well as sustainability. And I think we are creating that kind of a ethical market, where people want to know, how have your goods been produced? Is it through the slave labor, to the sweatshops? How are you producing your goods using wasting water, clean water that should not be wasted? So in a sense, the more we use our information technology to engage with these questions, and to actually, this is where the young can actually lead, to really ask for greater accountability in the way we produce and consume our goods and services. Because at the end of the day, that is what will make a difference. So the market will make a difference, and how we consume, how we produce, how we engage, how we use our natural resources, how do we really make sure that we, our old tradition, and I learned it from my grandmother's time, never use and take what is more than is necessary. I mean, where there is life, we have to take and consume, but at the same time, do not all be so greedy. I mean, Gandhi has some of the best quotes when he actually said, there is enough in this world, in this planet, a lovely planet of ours, for everyone's needs, but not sufficient for even one person's greed if we can't control and manage our greed. And therefore, I think this whole ethics, which many of us have from generations, is how do we think intergenerationally and not just in terms of short term. So very well taken. I think the issue of resources and accountability, Bernard, is a critical one, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that whatever resources we give, especially to public causes, that it goes to the right places and it goes to the right people. And therefore, having networks of accountability, having systems whereby we can track where monies have been going is critical. We have international civil society doing that. We have local groups doing that. We have the UN doing that. And I think we also have to ensure that that we also cultivate this whole be comfortable with whistleblowers. If someone sees that something is not being done correctly, that there is a place to go to make a complaint, and that complaint will be taken seriously. So at the end of the day, we are all struggling with systems of accountability, because it's only with accountability with that people feel that they want to strengthen shared responsibility.
Thank you. That has to be the last question, and then one quick question from the audience outside. Yes, please.
Good morning, Nolene.
Good morning.
My name is Trina. I'm the president of Unifem in Singapore. And I want to thank you for help setting up Unifem in Singapore many, many years ago. Yeah. And you're truly an inspiration to my team. And whenever I meet people in non-Asians, your name is always brought up with a lot of pride. My question is a somewhat personal one. How do you balance your work, which you're clearly so passionate about, with your family life? Because it's such a big part of you. And my next question is, what's the next stage? What's next after you leave the non-Nations? You spent 30 years. Have you ever given it much thought? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the role of being in charge of the National Committee of Unifem here. I just want to say that one of the things that I've tried to do in my life in the United Nations is to actually build strong institutions. Unifem was a very weak institution when I found it. And after 14 years, I was able to build up its programs, its work, its profile, its legitimacy, its authority, and eventually now convert it to UN Women. And this, for the first time, the United Nations has an Under-Secretary General to address the issues of women's empowerment and gender equality. And it has the right level of resources and the right level of authority to be at the same table as the SG when it comes to be a member of its chief executive board. And then never before we had that. So building institutions is also, besides putting issues on the agenda, is to build strong institutions that can deliver for people, is another passion of mine. How do I balance my work life with my family life? Well, actually, my daughter is here. And maybe Lillian stand up. No, she's too shy, but here she is.
She looks all right, fairly well brought up. Yeah.
I think you may have to interview her. but really, I think I don't separate my life and my work too much. I bring her when she was a student and I was in charge of Unifem. When she was on holiday, I would bring her wherever I went. So she was exposed to whatever I was exposed to. And now she just came back from Haiti. She has been working in Haiti to help with the earthquake, and she was also involved with Aceh for 4 years. In fact, the first week when the tsunami struck, she gave up her PhD in Oxford to go to Aceh and live there for 4 years. She was involved with the Cyclone Nargis in Myanmar. So she's, I hope to have brought up children who are creative, who are strong, and who are able to contribute to the world in their own ways, but also to have a sense of joy and laughter. But I think that the thing about me maybe is that I also I love life, and I enjoy. I love life.
Oh,
right? I think life is a gift, and therefore I love friendship. So there is that helps to create the environment around you, and hopefully that gets transmitted to the children as well. That it's not all negative or it's so hard or whatever, but that there are always challenges that terrible challenges, and believe you me, they know the challenges that I have to go through and they have to go through. But challenges are there, and that's part of the human experience. But equally a part of human experience is the gift of life.
Yeah. I think that's probably the perfect note to end this discussion.
What next?
What next?
What next? What next?
Yeah, thanks for reminding me.
What next? Well, I think I may, it depends on the SG. If SG gets elected, he may ask me to stay on for a few more years as head of ESCAP, of the Regional Commission in Asia Pacific. And if he doesn't get, no, he will get elected. So he will get elected. So for his second term. So I think for the next few years, I'll be there. But I also enjoy writing and reflecting. So hopefully after this, I would get out of the public sphere and go more into a reflective mode, and maybe spend quite a bit of time writing. my daughter actually made me list down all the books that I have to write, and I discovered that I have 5 books to write.
Wow.
So I think I will have a very interesting retirement period of writing books and sharing thoughts and so on. So I'm really looking forward to that as well.
And we're looking forward to those books as well, we are sure. But do tell us a lot more stories. You know, not now, but later during the networking session, briefly, do share. I would like to just say this. I think it's not often, in fact, it's not that I think, it's not often that you meet someone who is not jaded, who's not jaded, who's not tired out by the system. Systems tire us, you know, and it's an incredible ability that you seem to have to be able to ride it. And I think that's got a lot to do with that love of life that you talked about. And I think it's highly believable. And I wish in this session an iota of that would have sort of transmitted to the rest of us. Because sometimes we don't know what we complain about. You know, because there are so many things out there, so many people are doing, and not complaining about lack of resources, but just going out there and do it, while many of us just sit on our hands and complain. And for me, that's the strongest takeaway. You are admirable, but we hope at some point, as the young lady said, you would be the norm. On that note, I'd like you to join me in saying a big thank you and how proud we are of Dr. Noeleen Heyzer.
Thank you.
May I give you a hug? From all of us.
Thank you.
And we've got something for you. Can we give her a standing ovation, guys? This is from your Singapore family, right? And this is a wonderful picture of you, just taken here, live, and we have created this. And this is for you, from us.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I was told to hold it like that.
Can they capture it? For all to see? Thank you. This is our standard style with the photograph. We'd like you to sign something here. And we're going to keep this. Right?
Okay. Okay.
Say something nice, okay? Thank you. This is what her writing is slightly better than doctors. Noeleen, thank you very much once again. Thank you.
Thank you.